so much. I love you so much. I love you so much. I love you so much.
Hello, all you positive heads out there. Thanks for tuning your beautiful brainwaves into another episode of the Positive Head Podcast, where we are firmly convinced that creating success and happiness is rooted in understanding the ultimate nature of reality and the fact that as human beings, we are all immensely powerful fractals of the one and only source consciousness, which creates and animates all things. Now, of course, understanding this powerful truth is one thing. Applying this incredibly empowering wisdom to everyday life, well, that's another, which is exactly why we provide you with a fresh serving of soul food for thought 5 days a week to help constantly remind you of what matters most. You are it. And I'm your host, Brandon Beecham. I'm the one who will be here with you each and every Wednesday, interviewing a different consciousness changemaker that is also out there working tirelessly to help catalyze change and expand awareness all across Spaceship Earth. On the other 4 weekdays, you can hear me discussing topics such as my favorite thought-provoking quotes, reading and discussing wisdom from empowering books, playing clips from various inspirational spiritual teachers, sharing a bit of mysterious news, taking questions from the audience, and essentially digging into any other mind-expansive topics that will help keep your soul fed by tuning you into positive vibrations on a consistent basis. And you guys have heard me say that if I ever run ads on the show, it will only be with a company that I fully support because I believe their intention is to make a positive difference in the world. Well, I'm pleased to announce that day has arrived and that this episode of the Positive Head Podcast is being brought to you thanks to the support of Gaia. If you're not familiar, Gaia is the go-to source for streaming consciousness content online. And you can sign up for your first month for only 99 cents at gaia.com/positivehead. That's spelled GAIA.com/positivehead. Check it out. All right, all you positive heads. On this week's interview episode, I'm very excited to have Frank Ostaseski here with me on the show. Frank is an internationally respected Buddhist teacher and co-founder of the Zen Hospice Project and Metta Institute. He's lectured at Harvard Medical School, the Mayo Clinic, been named as one of the 50 most innovative people by AARP, highlighted on the Oprah Winfrey Show, and honored by the Dalai Lama, last but not least there. That's quite the resume there, Frank. Hey there. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Brandon. Nice to be with you. Happy to be with you.
Such a pleasure. Very excited to pick your brain here. And I'm going to start off the same place. I always start with the same question and end with the same question. And the jumping off point is you're in an elevator. You have 10 floors to answer. The guy next to you looks over, says, "What's your passion?" What do you say?
My passion is service, serving other people. There's a mutual benefit in service. You know, when I take care of others, there's a way where I'm also nurturing myself. So, compassionate service. That's always been my through line.
I love that. It's something that I reiterate all the time on the show, the idea that there are no others. And by, giving to anyone that's, apparently external of self, it's always, in a sense, giving to self. All right. And by that rationale, there are no selfless acts in a very good way. Right. So I love that. Very much resonates with me. Maybe you can give us a little background starting out just on your story and how you ended up where you're at. Yeah.
Well, thanks. And as you mentioned in your intro, I started a program called the Zen Hospice Project. I co-founded it back in the mid-'80s. And it was the first Buddhist hospice in America. And the notion was pretty simple, really. We didn't have much of a plan. We just thought there was a natural match between people who were cultivating what we might call the listening heart or the listening mind through meditation and people who needed to be heard at least once in their life, folks who were dying. Mm-hmm. And so we started out working with people mostly living on the streets initially, and then came to include all kinds of folks from all stratas of society who were in the final months, weeks of their lives. And we cared for them 24/7 in our hospice residence. Yeah.
Wow.
But what got me into it, it's hard to say what gets you into something, it's a winding, meandering road sometimes.
Sure.
But my own parents died when I was quite young. I was a teenager when my mom died. My dad died a few years later. I got introduced to Buddhist practice, as you mentioned early on. The central teaching in that is impermanence or constant change. So that led me in this direction. I worked with refugees in southern Mexico who were fleeing from wars in Central America. And there I saw a lot of horrible dying and cared for lots of people. There were 150,000 refugees there. And then when I came back to the States, the AIDS epidemic hit. And I was around on the front lines of the very early days of the AIDS epidemic. And in San Francisco, where I live, we had 30,000 people die of AIDS. 30,000 people. And when we forget what a devastating disease and illness this was for people. So all of those are factors that led me to the work that I do. And, we'll talk more about what I've learned from that work as we go. But, yeah, those were the initiators, the stimulus. Yeah.
Right. And, at this point, you have sat at the bedside of many people as they're passing. And that must be such a powerful perspective shift that it gives you, because, you think about it, most people, if they ever see anyone die, it's a rarity, right? Whereas to make that such a integral part of your life, it surely gives you a perspective that few people have.
Yeah, I think that, of course, this is changing in our culture. I think people are having more contact with this experience now. But, I've sat at the bedside with a few thousand people. And, one of the things that's true about that experience is that it can be beautiful and it can be horrible. It can be awfully sad and messy and transformative. But above all, it's normal. It's ordinary in a certain way because we all go through it. Nobody gets out of here alive, right? And so that's also true. And one thing that does happen, or often happens when people are near the end of their lives, is that they're very honest. They're real, And in a way, that's a great pleasure to be around. Yeah, that's a really great pleasure to be around because, there's no fooling around. There's no wasting time. It's real. And so it causes me to have to be real with the people that I'm serving. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that I notice just talking to you here in the first few minutes, Frank, is the very Zen-like energy that you give off. And that's something that I notice and always admire from folks like yourself. And so, I'm curious, sort of, Buddhism is one of those disciplines that I feel like there's some misunderstanding around. And, some people are like, of course, it's looked at as a religion. From others, it's like a philosophy. And I'm curious how Buddhism plays into your journey, what your thoughts are on, what is the Buddhist sort of perspective on, obviously death is, as you mentioned, it's a part of life. And from my perspective, I believe it's an extension of life. Like when we're, I believe when we're born to this dimension, this existence, we're sort of dying to the one from which we came, and vice versa. When we go back, we're dying, we're leaving here, but we're becoming more, our consciousness is becoming more fully aware, there on another plane of reality. What are your thoughts on that, and Buddhism's, from a Buddhist perspective, thoughts on that?
Well, we could probably discuss this till the cows come home, but the Buddhism is thought about as in lots of different ways, depending on whether you're inside the experience or outside it. But so yes, it's considered one of the major religions in the world. By others, it's considered a philosophy. I just think of it as a way of life, a way of being in the world. The central tenets, if you will, of Buddhism are everything changes, right? Everything comes and goes. Everything arises and passes away. That's true. And when we don't see that truth, and we don't live by that truth in a way, we're not in harmony with that truth, we could say, then we suffer. We have difficult time. We have stress. We have unpleasantness. Yeah. And also, if everything's changing all the time, then, who are we? Are we just some solid thing going through a changing world, or are we that change as well? So Buddhism posits the idea that the human beings are, in fact, constant change, coming together and falling apart all the time in a certain way. So that's the Buddhist wrap, right? But, what's more useful, I think, for our discussion is, that life and death are a kind of package deal. You don't get one without the other. In Zen Buddhism, there's a wonderful term, shoji. Shoji means birth, death. It's one word. And it means that there's no separation between life and death except a small hyphen, a thin line that connects the two. So a life that doesn't include death is half a life, So an awareness of death, in a way, keeping death as our advisor in some way, helps us to really appreciate just how precarious this life is. And because it's precarious, it also helps us to step into its preciousness, to really appreciate just how remarkable and precious it is. And then we want to jump in with both feet, right? We want to really lead our lives in a way that's meaningful and purposeful and characterized by love and hopefully some wisdom. Yeah.
Yeah, beautiful. Yeah, being a very adventurous spirit, I personally, I certainly have a lot that I intend to do in this life still, but I don't have a fear of death. I actually look at it as an adventure. It's like I'm excited by the prospect. Like I said, it's not something I'm like ready to go now, or of course, if I'm meant, then I believe I will when the time is right. But it's for so many people, it's such a fearful notion. It's so incredibly intimidating. And, I feel like if we can move beyond that sort of fearful perspective and as you say, it is a package deal. It is a part of life. It's a positive part of this existence. That it can really bring a certain peace and calm to our lives. And I'd imagine you've seen both ends of that, right? I'm sure you've seen people who are very comfortable and ready to go, with a full heart and have lived a full life, and there's sort of fearless. And you've probably seen the other end of that where they're just riddled with fear and the unknown and all those things. And curious what you think sort of the differences between those two types of people that I'm assuming you've witnessed.
Yeah, beautiful. That's a great question. Each person dies in their own unique way, just as we're all get born in our own unique way. And so there's no one way to die, no right way to die. And but I do find that the people that have, let's call them more peaceful passings, tend to have lived into the bigger questions of their life, tend to have lived into the deeper meaning of what it means to be human. And now some of them came to that understanding through religion or spiritual practice or some kind of inner work. Others came to it through time in nature or through their relationships with their friends and family members and the people they love. Lots of things can orient us toward an awareness of something bigger than ourselves. When people are dying, everybody who dies, they all have a story about what happens after they die. And I don't pretend to know what actually happens after we die. I don't know. I'm curious. I'm full of wonder about it. And I'll find out, right? But so I don't impose my ideas on other people. Here's an example. There was a woman that I worked with. She was a Christian Scientist, 90 years old, really just full of love, this woman. She's just remarkable and very, very accepting of her dying process, kind of like you were describing. And, she described it to me as she just wanted to lay her head in the lap of Jesus. That's how she put it. And so she was very, very comfortable. And then her granddaughter, came to visit her. And she said, Grandma, she said, I was reading a book. And in this book, it says that when you die, everybody who's ever died before you, who you knew, will be there to meet you. Now, Grandma became terrified.
Uh-oh.
Yeah, because what she hadn't ever acknowledged to her family, but she told to me, was that her husband, Edgar, who she lived with all her life, had been beating her most of her life. And that he had died 4 or 5 years before. And the idea of spending eternity with Edgar was not at all pleasant for her. It was frightening. So this is why I don't impose my ideas on other people. At the same time, I also ask people regularly, what do you think happens after you die? Now, I'm not interested again in coming up with the right answer, but I do know that the way in which they think about it, the story they carry, shapes the way in which they die, and I think even to some extent the way in which we live our lives. So here's an example. There was a guy, Jackie, African-American guy who came off the streets. He was a heroin user for 30 years. And here he was at this Buddhist hospice, at the Zen Hospice Project. And so one day I'm sitting out in the backyard and he's smoking a cigarette. And I said, hey, Jackie, I said, here you are at this Buddhist hospice. You think you get born again? And he said, yep. Mm-hmm. And I said, well, what are you going to get born as, Mm-hmm. I said, you could come as a king or a queen, or some people say, if you get born as a cow, it's a really sacred thing,
Right.
And he said, I'm not coming back as no goddamn cow like that. And I said, well, what are you going to come back as? He said, Jackie. I said, Jackie, why do you want to be Jackie? You could be anything. He said, nope. I said, how come? He said, because next time I'm going to get it right. You see, we were into a whole different conversation now, Brandon. Really a different conversation about his life and really looking at where the meaning and value of his life was. So again, I think that question about what happens after we die, no one can empirically prove to us it's going to be this way or that way. But we can see how that question or how that our ideas or beliefs about what happened after we die shape the way in which we die. Yeah, and that's important. That's really important.
Yeah, what a powerful perspective he had, and it's something that, once again, as you said, none of us have been there, and we'll find out. And I'm one who is I enjoy the hearing people's perspectives and, of course, theorizing, and I have my own theories. And to me, that rings true as a possibility. I believe in the idea that there is potential Jackies and different paths that we all can choose, and sort of life plays out at the corner of free will and destiny. From my belief, my theory. And so, Jackie can do it again and try and make different decisions and have different outcomes. So I think that's what a powerful perspective, that individual had. And
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, go right ahead. I'm done.
I was just going to say that, all that's true, what you just said. And the other thing that's true is that we can do that right now. We don't need to wait until the time we're dying to learn the lessons it has to teach, or, wait to see whether or not any of these beliefs that we have about, what happens after death are true. We can do it right now. We can choose differently right now.
Yeah.
I think that one of the things that's so for us, particularly in America, is that we're so ruggedly individualist. We're so we define ourselves through our separation rather than through our belonging. Sure. And so one of the things one of the effects that has on us is that we wind up feeling very cut off, very isolated, very alone. And we get afraid of uncertainty. But if we learned to let go into uncertainty, to trust that our basic nature and the nature of the world are not different, then the fact that things are not solid and fixed becomes a liberating opportunity rather than a threat. I mean, everything will come apart. This is true of our bodies, our relationships, all of life, right? It's happening all the time.
Only thing in life guaranteed is change.
Right. So it's not just happening at the end of our life. This is the nature of life, right? So it's not like we're a solid thing going through a changing world. We are that change. Yeah. Right. And we know that change isn't just a clear end. When a tree falls in the woods, it becomes a log. The log breaks down, becomes other things, right? So change is the law of, it's not just endings, it's also becoming. Yeah, right. Things are always becoming.
Yeah. It's back to the idea of death being a birth and birth being a death that I was touching on earlier. I'm sure you've probably heard the poem, one of my favorites, and I had to pull it out. It's so appropriate for the this episode, by Mary Elizabeth Fry. I just think it's so beautiful, and I'd imagine you've heard it, and if not, you'll hear it now. She said, "Do not stand at my grave and weep. I am not there. I do not sleep. I am 1,000 winds that blow. I am the diamonds glint on snow. I am the sunlight on ripened grain. I am the gentle autumn rain. When you awaken in the morning's hush, I am the swift uplifting rush of quiet birds in circled flight. I am the soft stars that shine at night. Do not stand at my grave and cry. I am not there. I did not die. I find that, I just love that. It's just so beautiful, and certainly it's so touching every time I hear it. So I just wanted to share.
Beautiful. It's a beautiful. I know the poem, and it's beautiful. And one of the things that she's suggesting, I think, at least we could understand it this way, is that we're not separate and apart from everything else. That we are part of everything else. That we are. I go to Hawaii oftentimes, and I have friends there who are big wave surfers, and they sit on the beach. We sit there on the sand, and they explain to me about the waves, how they form thousands of miles out at sea, how they break across the reef, and they know each wave unbelievably. I mean, they're just so exact in their understanding of waves.
Right.
And they try and impart this wisdom to me, and I can't get it. I really don't understand it all. But what I see is that every one of those waves comes in. They're uniquely beautiful. They all crash on the sand, and they all get sucked back out to sea. So each wave has its own uniqueness, or its own individuality, but it's not separate from the sea. We can be completely unique, remarkably individual. But we don't have to separate ourselves off, cut ourselves off from everyone else. We're the same fabric.
Right. Yeah, it's, of course,
really
the other one.
The way we take care of each other. Yeah, I'm sorry. That changes the way we take care of each other, I think, also.
Yeah. When you have that holistic view of everything being everything and it all being connected, it really is such a game changer. Another little snippet from Emily Dickinson, this quiet dust was gentlemen and ladies and lads and girls, was laughter and ability and sighing and frocks and curls. Talking about dust, this is what it used to be. It's constantly in this changing state. We were once a star that lived out its full life cycle, died, exploded outward, just reformed into these characters, Frank and Brandon in this instance, right? And it will continue. We're in that process, and it's a never-ending process, I believe. So it's just, such a beautiful thing to have sort of given your whole life to dealing with and understanding and bringing peace to. So I really honor and respect what you've done. And, speaking of being honored, you've had some pretty big ones. Being honored by the Dalai Lama. Can you tell us a little bit about how that comes about?
Well, just being in the presence of the Dalai Lama is in itself a great gift,
I've heard this.
Well, I'll share a story. When you meet the Dalai Lama, or generally, what happens? You bow. You put your two hands together, your right hand and left hand together. And in Buddhism, we think of wisdom and compassion as being the two wings that allow us to fly. And so when you bring your hands together, as you see oftentimes in Asian countries, people doing that, what you're doing is bringing together wisdom and compassion into one thing.
I love that.
And so then when you bow to somebody like the Dalai Lama, you bow lower than them. And now I'm a very tall guy. I'm 6'4", and the Dalai Lama is much smaller than me. So when I bow down lower. And I sort of
have you been doing yoga?
He was looking, and so he bowed lower, and then so I bowed lower. And then the Dalai Lama bowed lower. And then I was like almost down to the floor. And I thought, oh boy, I hope he doesn't make me go further, And I looked up, he just broke into laughter. And he just gave me a big hug,
So
and he
good.
was just teasing me. And reminding me not to be too somber and serious,
Right.
The Dalai Lama.
What a wonderful
people
story.
Go to him for his wisdom and unbelievable wisdom and compassion. But I think half the people go there just to hear him laugh,
Yeah. I had Dean Radin on my show recently, Institute of Noetic Scientists there. I don't know if you're familiar with him or his work. And he was discussing the psychologist Paul Ekman and how he had a meeting with the Dalai Lama and how it sort of changed him. And he was talking about, Paul realized he had been carrying so much anger. And when he just being in the presence of the Dalai Lama, all this anger was just gone. And he came out, and it took him a while to kind of put his finger on what just happened to me. Like I felt like a totally different person. And he, ultimately realized all the anger I've been carrying was just, gone, being in the presence of the Dalai Lama. And so when you started off by saying just being in his presence, I think that's such a fascinating idea. And of course, that's what Dean Radin studies, right? Is, this sort of phenomenon and so forth. And so curious that you mentioned that. And it sounds like you had the same type of experience in your own way where his energy field has just emanated in such a way that you feel it, instantly. It sounds like.
Absolutely. But, and I've had the good fortune of being in his presence a number of times. And so, he's also human. And he's angry,
sure. Of course.
And he has that whole range of human experiences. It's just that his relationship to those strong emotional states is not the same as you and I. He's not so fixed on them. He's not so identified with them. But,
right.
we can do that with each other. When you're with someone who's dying, for example, someone's a nurse or a family caregiver, and you move someone to the bed from the bed to the commode, you lend them the strength of your back. You give them your arms and your legs in a way. That's what you do. They borrow your arms and legs. But when we're working with someone near the end of life or at any time in life, we can also lend people the stability of our mind. We can open our heart in such a way that it might encourage them to do the same. And when we do that, we become a true refuge for people. We become a compassionate companion for them. And so we can all do that to some extent. One calm person in the room can make all the difference. Particularly when there's crisis or there's a lot of emotional upheaval or confusion. One calm person in the room can make all the difference.
Yeah. Isn't that beautiful? So
I think we underestimate the power of human presence sometimes.
Yeah, it's something that I fully agree, and they say that about sort of like enlightened masters and people who have really done the self-work to change their own energetic field, and where, you hear about these stories of, people that could be in the presence of the Buddha or Jesus or, any of those I'm naming like the sort of the rock stars of enlightenment, right? The Beatles. But that people would be changed just by being in their presence. And I do agree that that's something that we all have the ability to affect people without saying a word, as we sort of, just as I pointed out, just your energy instantly talking to you, there's such a peaceful, calming effect that it has. So like I said, it's something that I always admire as someone who loves affecting others with my energy. But I've always, come from I have so much of it. It's like, kind of like bubbling out and bubbling over me. So it's sort of I really admire that, attaining that level of calm is something that has been somewhat challenging for me at times, but I have my moments, I suppose.
Let me give you an example, Brandon, of how this works. At the hospice, we had two men who were dying of AIDS. This is some years ago. And one of them, Stephen, when you went into his room, you felt like you were walking into a sanctuary. It was he was practically transparent. He was so still and calm. And Rick, on the other hand, was a man also dying of AIDS who had a stroke. And so he was paralyzed on one side, and he had difficulty finding words. And he was very angry. He was really furious. And all of our efforts to help him sort of bounced off his defensive shields. So this one evening or one afternoon, I said to Rick, it looks like Stephen might be dying, and so if you'd like to say goodbye, now's the time. And so we walked down the hall to Stephen's room, and Rick came in and sat on Stephen's bed. And I went and sat in the corner just to observe. I don't jump in to say much or help unless it's really needed. And then I watched these two men, Brandon. It was so beautiful to see. They entered into this profound and silent conversation. 10 minutes passed, 15 minutes, a half an hour passed, not a word spoken between them, not a word.
Wow.
And then after about 45 minutes, Rick just nodded his head. Remember, Rick is the one who can't speak so well. He just nodded his head, and Stephen said, "Yeah, that was great."
Wow.
And Rick got up from the bed and went back to his room, and Stephen died later that night. So what happened there in that exchange? What happened was, I think, Rick was looking at his own destiny. He knew that in a matter of days or weeks or a month, he also would be dying of the same illness. And he was scared. Stephen, on the other hand, had done his homework. He had been willing to look and see his relationship to grief, to fear, to anxiety, to, his own, challenges and beauty, the challenges and beauty of his life. And because he'd done that homework, so to speak, he could be with Rick's fear without moving away, without cringing, And in fact, just the opposite. When Rick would look at him in fear, Stephen would just give back so much love and compassion, And that's what was beautiful, was the exchange between them, the mutual recognition between them, It was just extraordinary. Wow. So to do this work, whether it's work with the dying or work with caring for a friend that's going through a troubling time, we have to do our own homework. We have to look and see what's our relationship to these issues. Because, for example, if somebody says, I'm afraid, and you say, I understand, but you haven't really done your homework, you don't really know what it's like to be afraid, then that person's going to smell your insincerity and your sentimentality. They're going to sniff it out, and you're not going to be trustworthy for them. So we have to do the homework. We have to do the work now. It's a ridiculous gamble to wait until the time of our dying and imagine that then we will have the strength of body, the emotional stability, the mental clarity to do the work of a lifetime. We have to do it now. We have to do that work now. We have to do that inner work and that exploration now. Start the adventure now.
All right. Well, now seems like a good moment to take a quick minute to tell those of you who aren't familiar a bit about our sponsor, Gaia. I've been a big fan of Gaia for many years now, which is why they're the only content provider I've ever reached out to in regards to potentially supporting the Positive Head podcast. So needless to say, I'm very excited they're now supporting the show. Gaia truly is my personal go-to source for streaming consciousness content on the web. They have an incredible 7,000 plus exclusive videos covering 5,000 years of wisdom. Just to give you an example, on May 1st on the show Wisdom Teachings, host David Wilcock explores the scientific proof of ascension, DNA activation, and how interplanetary climate change is made possible with nested spheres of energy emanating from the galaxy. I mean, it'd be pretty hard to be more up my alley, right? As you guys all constantly hear me say, it's a daily conscious effort to maintain an elevated vibration. And if you're looking to go deep down the rabbit hole to do so, then Gaia is the best place I know of to do it, period. And you can sign up for your first month for only 99 cents at gaia.com/positivehead. That's spelled GAIA.com/positivehead. Check it out. You talked about, I saw a video clip and you just mentioned compassion, and it made me think of this video clip that I saw that was a wonderful story about turning towards suffering. And you used the analogy of putting your hands on the pole. Would you share that story with us?
Oh, sure. Yeah. I mean, we were talking about, I was somewhere in the Northwest, up in Idaho, talking about compassion, and I was saying that compassion gives us the capacity to move toward our suffering. And that's where the healing is always found, when we move toward it. And that's counterintuitive. So a guy in the audience said, that's like telephone poles. And I didn't know what the hell he was talking about. I said, what do you mean? He said, well, telephone poles. He said, when you put them in the ground, they're about 40 feet high. He said, they're unstable for a period of time. And so they can fall. And if they fall on a man, they can break his back. He said, so the first day I was on the job, I said to my partner, if that pole falls, toward us, I'm running like hell the other way.
Yeah.
And the old timer,
natural instinct, right?
Of course. Yeah. But the veteran, the old guy, the guy been around for a while, he said, you don't want to do that. He said, if that pole starts to fall, you want to go right up to it. You want to put your hands right on it. It's the only safe place to be.
Wow.
Now, take that metaphor into the rest of our lives. When we're experiencing some kind of difficulty, we want to get out of town, right? We want to, run away. And then, big surprise, it comes and hits us in the back of the head,
Right.
So when there's difficulty, when there's fear, when there's depression, when there's grief, our work in a way is to go right toward it, to put our hands mercifully, tenderly on that experience, to come to know it. Not run away from it, but come to know it. And in coming to know it, we learn something about it. We learn how to work with it. We can metabolize the experience. We can be free of the suffering that might have been generated by that particular set of conditions.
Yeah, I love that.
Go toward the experience, yeah.
Yeah, I always say that. I believe it so wholeheartedly by embracing sort of the lump of coal, right? When something comes up in your life, if you embrace it and don't run from it, oftentimes it's a blessing in disguise, right? The lump of coal turns to a diamond. And so I absolutely love that metaphor and that idea of turning towards the suffering, facing it, wrapping your arms around it, embracing it, and it's the path to move through it and come out the other side. What are the biggest, one of the things I think of course, we're all going to end up on our deathbed, and you sat next to so many people on their deathbed. And for those who maybe are living their lives and they're far away from that moment, but yet they're fearful about taking that risk, or, they're fearful, just in general, and as a result, they're missing out on all the most wonderful things that life has to offer. So I'm curious, what are some of the biggest regrets you've heard? Because I feel like hearing some of those regrets for those who, are sort of sitting on the fence with their life, who better to give that perspective than someone who's at the end of their life?
Yeah, and a lot has been written about this, about people's famous regrets or the 5 regrets and things. And there's some wonderful books on this. I think that really what is more helpful in this thing is not to emphasize what do people regret, but actually what do people step into? What do they step into that they find and discover that is really valuable, that we could really engage this right now in this part of our life? One of the things that's so is that there's 2 big questions that people come to at the end of their lives in one way or another. And the first question is, am I loved? Am I loved?
Wow.
And the second is, did I love well? Did I love fully? Did I give myself to love?
Wow.
Those are the 2 big questions. Rarely do people say, gee, I wished I'd spent more time at the office, or I'd bought that second Mercedes, or
right.
Yes, people have regrets about this or that, but most of it comes down to their ability to love. And what is it that blocks that love? What is it that gets in the way of that love? The absence of forgiveness, or holding grudges, or, staying rigidly fixed on our views, So I think that, again, near the time of dying, people can go through profound transformations, unbelievable transformations in the final weeks, days, even moments of their life. Now, for some of us, we might say, too late. That's too late. And I might tend to agree. But here's the thing. If that opportunity exists at the time of our death, it exists now. And we need not wait until the time of our death to discover what the wisdom of death has to teach. That's why I wrote the book. I mean, the book, The 5 Invitations, which I wrote, is basically about the wisdom that is gained from being close to death. There's a lot of books out there about preparing for your dying and taking care of people who are dead, or even lots of books about what happens after we die. But there's very few that speak about the wisdom that death has to impart to us in living fully. And that's why we wrote the book. It's called Discovering What Death Can Teach Us About Living Fully. 5 Invitations.
Wow.
So I think that's really where I want to put the emphasis is what are the transformative possibilities that dying introduces us to, and how can we live into those now?
I absolutely love those 2 points that you made. It's the 2 questions, right? Am I loved, and did I love fully? Did I, it made me instantly think of one of my favorite Rumi quotes: your task is not to seek for love, but merely to seek and find the barriers within yourself that you have built against it. And what a powerful realization that is all in the end. I always say, love is the answer. Now, what was the question? Obviously, that is, when we get down to it, it makes all the sense in the world to me that you would be there saying, am I loved? And we all want to be loved. We all desire that experience. And did I love fully? Such a powerful thing to bring that realization now and sort of answer and deal with those issues now. So poignant and powerful. I'd love to talk a little bit about these. You touched on your book, which is recently came out, right? The five invitations. I'd love to. I know you can't go into, it'd be probably an hours long discussion, but I'd love to get some overview for the listeners in regards, and myself, those 5 invitations.
Well, we called the book The 5 Invitations because, in a way, I think of death as inviting us fully into life. That's what it does. And they are principles, we could say, that I learned at the bedside of folks who were dying. Things that these folks were my teachers, and they taught me about what matters most, in a way. And so these 5 invitations, I wrote them down once on a cocktail napkin. I was flying over Kansas, 30,000 feet over Kansas. I was going back to be with Bill Moyers, the journalist who was doing a film on dying in America. And he asked me if I would go back, along with a lot of other people, to teach his crew about how to be with dying. And so on the way, I tried to just jot down some notes. Well, what have I really learned, And so here's the 5. We'll just run through them and so to see. So the first one is don't wait. Don't wait. Don't wait until the time of dying to find the wisdom it has to teach. Don't wait to tell someone you love that you love them. Don't wait. Waiting is full of expectation. Waiting for the next moment to arrive. We miss this one.
Never comes.
Right. So don't wait. That's the first one. Second one is welcome everything. Push away nothing. That's the little slogan.
Powerful.
The invitation. Now, welcome. That sounds great, right? Welcome everything. Wow. Yeah. Everything. Yes. Now, to welcome something doesn't mean we have to agree with it. It doesn't mean that we have to accept that we have to like it. It just means we have to be willing to meet it. It's here at our doorstep, yeah? Here it is. Yeah. Let's find a way of being with it in some way. There's a wonderful quote by the great African-American writer, James Baldwin, that I love very much. He says, not everything that can be faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed if it's not faced, yeah?
Love that.
So that's the value of welcome everything, push away nothing, right? Yeah. The third one is bring your whole self to the experience. Bring your whole self to the experience. Now, oftentimes, we think it's our strength that's going to help, our expertise that's going to help. But it's also our fearlessness that helps, and our helplessness that helps. They serve as a meeting place with other people. They help us to build an empathetic bridge to the other person's experience. I'll share a story. I was caring for a friend who was dying of AIDS many years ago. And in this one morning, Brandon, he lost his ability to stand, to hold a fork, or to speak in any intelligent way. He got very confused, just spoke gobbledygook. And it was my day to take care of him. So I did, and we went through the day and into the evening and the early hours of the morning, and it was a lot of work to take care of him. It was hard. He had these anal tumors and constant diarrhea, and it was physically really difficult. And so we moved from the toilet to the bath and back to the toilet dozens of times in the night. And I have to say, I'm embarrassed to say, but I was manipulative and paternalistic, and I treated him like a child, And then in this one moment, I was washing my hands and looking in the vanity mirror, and over the sink, and he was right behind me, sitting on the toilet with his pajamas down around his ankles. And he turned to me, he whispered to me, and he said, "You're trying too hard." And I was trying way too hard. Me, Mr. Hospice, me, Mr. Death, trying too hard. So I sat down beside the toilet with him, and I just cried. And this moment, sitting there next to the toilet, was the most intimate of our whole friendship. Because up until that point, I had been unwilling to go into the territory of helplessness where he was living. I was afraid that if I went in there, we'd both be lost, and I couldn't be of any use. But actually, that wasn't the case. Once I was willing to be helpless with him, willing to move into that territory, we didn't get stuck there. The situation showed us what to do next, But I had to be willing I had to know that place, just as he knew it, in order to be of real service. So to bring our whole self to the experience is to, bring every part of ourself forward, not just our, persona and the positive image that we want to project to the world, but every part of it, right? So that's the third one. Bring your whole self to the experience. The fourth is find a place of rest in the middle of things. Find a place of rest in the middle of things. Now, we always think about rest as something we'll do later, like when we go on vacation or when our list gets checked off. But my list never gets checked off.
Right. Mine either.
If I wait for that, I'll never get rested, right? And, when you're caring for someone sick and dying, 24/7, you don't get to go away, it's good if you take little breaks, but truth is you're on. And so you got to find a way of resting right in the middle of what you're doing. And we do that by bringing our attention fully and completely to whatever it is we're doing, so that our attention isn't distracted, isn't scattered. Multitasking is a myth. All that means is that we put a very little bit of attention on a lot of things, So to find a place of rest, really to rest with things as they are also, as opposed to always pushing to make things different than they are, wanting to reshape the world in our image and likeness in some way. Yeah. Okay, so that's the fourth. The fifth one is cultivate don't know mind. Now, what does that mean? That's one I felt obliged to put something Zen-like in the list. Cultivate don't know mind. It's not a encouragement to be ignorant, Right. Not knowing. Ignorance is not knowing. Ignorance is that we know something, but it's the wrong thing, and we insist on it. There's a lot of that going on in the world right now.
Right.
So, don't know mind is a mind that's not imposing its knowing on the situation. It's willing to be open, to be receptive, to have a sense of curiosity, a sense of adventure you spoke of earlier. It's a kind of wonder, willingness to not know. Yeah.
Childlike, right?
When we do that, then we can really be informed by the situation that we're in. So those are the five. Don't wait. Welcome everything. Push away nothing. Bring your whole self to the experience. Find a place of rest in the middle of things. And cultivate don't know mind. They've been my guides in caring for the dying for 3 decades, but I think that they also have a relevance for the rest of us in living a life of integrity and wisdom and hopefully compassion.
Such a powerful invitation to put out there, and I really applaud you for sharing. And like you said, 3 decades to sort of compile this wisdom and share it with people is such a incredible offering, and I greatly appreciate it, and I know the listeners do as well. And one thing that comes to mind that I'm curious about is for people, anyone out listening who may be, having the experience of knowing that we're all dying, right, to some degree, but some people, it's much closer in the mirror than others, with a terminal illness or something like that. What advice would you give? What is the number one piece of advice? Obviously, what you just went over is advice of sorts, but what would you say? Is there something that you kind of would say to almost any and everyone who's facing death?
Oh boy. Well, first, I tend not to give too much advice because advice is cheap, right?
Right.
I think I would just encourage people to trust the process. That there is something in the dying process that is conducive to our growing intimacy, to our waking up, to our learning about the value of this life and its ultimate purpose. When we're dying, all the ways we define ourselves. I'm a mother, I'm a father, I'm a Buddhist teacher. All of these ideas about who we are, they all are stripped away by illness, or they're gracefully given up. And then we come down to something much more fundamental, something more essential, who we actually are. And dying is conducive to that. It's helpful, actually, in that process. So I want to say to people, trust the process. And that doesn't mean it's going to be easy, or that it'll be, full of light and love all the time. Sure. It's the hardest thing we'll ever do, but we'll all go through it. And so to trust it. Have basic trust in it. Yeah.
I love that. I love that. So to switch gears a little bit.
Yeah,
sorry,
okay,
go ahead. No, go right ahead.
I kept waiting for your synchronicity question.
No, that's, you spoke too soon. That's exactly where I'm at.
Sorry.
No worries. Perfect. So yes, my synchronicity question, as the listeners know, and I gave you a little forewarning, I love stories of synchronicity, serendipity, positive paranormal stories, just stories in general, uplifting stories, and wondering if you have something lovely to share. I imagine that you do, since you just brought it up.
Oh God, it's thousands of stories. It's just so many.
Oh, only thousands? All right. Well, the mic's on. Let's go.
Right. Well, here's one that just came to mind just now. There's a guy I used to work with. His name was Ed. He lived in his car. Actually, he lived in two cars. He had all his stuff in one car and he slept in the other one. He was a homeless guy. And I used to go see him every day, or every few days rather, and bring him some donuts and coffee. And he'd sit behind the driver's seat because that was his car, and I'd sit in the passenger seat. And we'd talk. And I'd, bring him into the general hospital and get him a shower and get him looked after and stuff. And one day I said to him, Ed, it's time to come inside, And he was dying. He didn't want to, but he eventually agreed. He came into the house. And so he's at our little 6-bed hospice. Zen Hospice had a 6-bed place and a 30-bed place. And he's in the small one. And that night we have a fill-in nurse. A woman comes from an agency to place the woman if someone's out sick. And I orient her to the house, and she goes into the room where Ed is, and she comes back out terrified. Has this, blank look on her face. And I said, what's the matter? And she said, what's that man's name? And I said, oh, that's Ed so-and-so. She said, it's my husband.
Oh,
she said, I
my
haven't
goodness.
seen him in 20 years.
Oh, my goodness.
We separated. He fell on hard times. Used to work in construction, lost his job, lost his insurance, and wound up on the streets. That's not an uncommon thing, actually, in our culture. And so I said, well, you can't take care of him. I said, we got to take care of you too, So we did. And over the course of the next, maybe 6 weeks, they made this reconciliation. It was quite beautiful, actually, to see. They'd separated many years earlier. And Ed died in the company and the care of his former wife.
Wow.
Now, that's already synchronistic, right? That's already pretty good.
Yeah.
Now, fast forward 6 months. I'm at a meeting with our board of directors, and boards of directors are often concerned about money. And so we were looking at the budget, and I said, don't worry about it. I said, we're going to be fine, I said, we're doing this good work, and I said, I really have confidence that what we need will come. And they said, oh, that's Pollyanna, Frank, and just then the doorbell. I go to answer the doorbell, and there's a Federal Express guy there. Accept the Federal Express package, and I open it up, and there's a check for $20,000 inside.
Wow.
And it's from Ed's cousin, who found out about us, found out about Ed, lost contact with him also, found out about us, I suppose, through his former wife, and gave us a check for $20,000. And he gave us that check every year for 10 years. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow, that's incredible. And I think it's such a great exclamation point on your whole, here you are in that meeting saying, oh, we're doing good work. We are serving. We are we're in the right place, doing the right thing. And as a result, I know and trust that we'll get what we need. And I always am stressing that point. So I love this story because it's just a great giant exclamation point on when you find, I always say and believe that serving others, your life passion, your life work in some way, shape, or form is going to involve serving others because I believe there are no others, as I mentioned earlier. So I love everything about that story. What a great one. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah, you're welcome. Yeah, here we are. We're all in the soup together, right?
Exactly. And it's quite the soup. It's quite the mix. Well, what's next for you? What, Frank, any other books planned? Any other
Well, I'm just talking
projects.
about this. We just put this one out about a month ago, so it's
Okay.
I'm going out on the road and talking about it a lot. The Zen Hospice Project, which I helped to co-found, I'm no longer there. I retired from there some years ago in 2005 to start the Metta Institute. Metta, M-E-T-T-A. It's a word in Pali, in the old Buddhist language, that means love, loving kindness. And I couldn't imagine a quality which was more necessary at the time of dying than love. That was both for the person in the bed and also the person caring for them. So in Metta Institute, we train people. We train docs and nurses, all kinds of healthcare professionals in mindful and compassionate care. And also we will be creating this next year more and more trainings for family caregivers, because most of the work out there, most of the people doing the work, rather, are family caregivers. We often talk about, right now we're in the midst of debates on healthcare reform. But, 45 million Americans are caring for a loved one who's sick or perhaps dying. So most of the care is happening by regular people who have no training at all, just they're figuring out as they go along using the Braille method, feeling their way through the experience. So we're going to spend more time training them. So if you go to 5invitations.com, you can find my schedule about things I'm doing. I'm teaching all over the world. In fact, I'm leaving for England on Friday, teach there, and then in Italy and elsewhere. So you can find out what I'm up to and also learn more about the book there. Also, one of the things I'm trying to do, actually, Brandon, is when people get the book, I've been trying to encourage them to share it with others. And I don't just mean get other people to buy it. I mean, get into a discussion, so what we did on the website is we created a book discussion guide so that if people got together in a small group or over dinner, they could really grapple with these 5 invitations, so there's some prompting questions and exercises and things that they can get on the website, 5invitations.com. So I'd encourage people to do that. And, start talking about it. Start talking about death. Go to. There's a beautiful website called Death Over Dinner. Death Over Dinner. Isn't that a great name?
I love it. Yeah.
Yeah. Michael Heeb started it about really conducting conversations over the dinner table that have meaning and heart meaning. And if your listeners might really be interested in it, to go there and see, that people of all stratas of society and all ages and all kinds of, circumstances are doing these remarkable events where they're just getting around a dinner table and talking about different related themes to this issue. So let's just encourage the conversation. And I want to thank you for encouraging the conversation through this podcast. It's really great of you to do that.
Oh, it's such an honor and a pleasure to connect with someone doing such remarkable work. It is, I've thoroughly enjoyed this, and I'm sure the listeners have as well. I do have one last question I'd like to leave you with, and it's particularly appropriate in this case, I believe. And 60 seconds or less, what is the meaning of life, according to Frank?
Oh boy, I think that meaning is something we construct. It's something we develop. And so I'm more interested in what's really important in life. And what's really important in life is to cherish ourselves and those we come in contact with, and to understand that nobody is more deserving of that love than you. I think this life is about learning and loving.
Yeah. And self-love, as you touched on, I always say is the number one thing. We all have different agendas and things I believe we're here to do, but I think it's top on each of our lists, learning self-love. So such a powerful perspective. Frank, thank you so much for taking the time to connect and share here. I look forward to continuing to follow your work, and perhaps we can circle back around at some point and do this again and hear some of those other 1,000 stories you have.
Thanks a lot, Brandon. I hope it was of some value and use to the people who listen.
Huge value. Thank you, my friend.
Okay.
Well, everyone, that concludes this week's interview episode. If you have enjoyed this positive download from our hearts and minds to yours, please take a minute, give us a rating or review on iTunes, since iTunes is the holy grail of all things podcasting. Your good reviews help us to reach more listeners. Also, we would be extremely appreciative if you would tell your friends and family about the show. Our sincere intent with the Positive Head podcast is to spread positivity to the world because we're selfish, quite honestly. I say that jokingly, but really only halfway joking. I'm referring to the good kind of selfish based on the knowing that we all get what we give in this life, because when we give, we're actually always giving to extensions of self, since we're all really one in the same consciousness, just in different bodies. So if you want to be a good selfish along with us by helping to spread the positivity, by all means, please proceed to shout about the Positive Head podcast from your rooftop. Otherwise, as you continue on your fabulous journey in this 3D reality, be sure to remember this. As long as you ain't dead, you're already positive ahead. Journey well, everyone, and thank you for being.